Day 7 of the siege, and the German position has changed from an army to a fortress with a fixed expiration date. The last drop of usable fuel burned 4 days ago, spent on a final desperate attempt to reposition 2 tanks into better defensive angles. Every panzer in the division now sits exactly where it ran dry, some at odd angles on hillsides, one half submerged in a dry creek bed where its driver tried to find one last route to escape the tightening circle. Colonel Hoffmann. History has finally recorded his name. Carved by necessity into the radio logs, his signals officer keeps out of habit, even though no signal has ever been received, has stopped thinking of his division as an armored force. It no longer is one. What remains is 600 infantrymen, functioning machine guns with limited ammunition, and a perimeter that is held for a week against an enemy who refuses to make the mistake of attacking it directly. Alexander has not ordered a single frontal assault since the first contact. His generals, particularly Parmenion, have pushed for it repeatedly. Alexander's answer has been the same each time. Machine guns make a frontal assault a massacre of his own men, and he has never spent Macedonian lives on a battle he can win by patience instead. So he has not attacked. He has surrounded and waited and studied. What Alexander's scouts have identified, after a week of careful observation, is the German position's single greatest vulnerability. Not the machine guns, not the remaining ammunition stockpile, but modest natural spring at the eastern edge of the German perimeter, the only reliable water source within miles. Cut the spring, and 600 men in the Persian heat have days, not weeks. Alexander gives the order on the morning of day 8. A detachment of his most disciplined infantry, supported by cavalry screening the flanks, moves to seize the high ground directly above the spring, not to attack the German perimeter, but to control the water source from outside it entirely. Hoffmann watches through field glasses as Macedonian soldiers calmly fortify a position on a ridge that commands the only spring his division has left. He understands immediately what has just happened, with the same sinking recognition that has defined every stage of this campaign. His enemy has once again identified the one weakness that matters most and moved to exploit it before Hoffmann could react. The spring itself remains inside German control ground, technically, but the ridge above it now holds Macedonian archers and javelin throwers who can make any German soldier who approaches the water do so under fire. Water can still be reached. It simply now costs blood every time. Hoffmann calculates his remaining margin with the same cold precision his training demanded of him before any of this began. 600 men, existing water reserves in canteens and containers, perhaps 2 days at controlled rationing. After that, every trip to the spring becomes a combat operation. He convenes his remaining officers that night, by lamplight, in a command tent that increasingly feels like the interior of a tomb rather than a headquarters. Lieutenant Weber, the former history student who first identified their situation as time displacement, proposes the only option that does not end in slow starvation behind the lines Alexander has drawn around them. A night raid, not toward the spring, toward the Macedonian supply lines themselves, where Weber's observation of enemy patrol patterns suggests a weakness of their own. Weber has spent the week of siege doing what any good intelligence officer does with time and idle hands, watching the enemy as closely as the enemy has been watching them. He has noticed something Hoffmann's combat officers missed entirely, focused as they were on the immediate military threat. The Macedonian supply train, bringing food and water forward from a camp roughly 2 miles to the south, follows the same route every night, lightly guarded, because Alexander's forces have had no reason to expect the surrounded, fuel-starved Germans to project offensive power beyond their own collapsing perimeter. It is exactly the kind of overconfidence that has never once appeared in Alexander's own conduct of this campaign, and precisely because of that, none of his officers have considered that the Germans might attempt it. Hoffmann approves the raid with the specific caution of a man who understands he is spending his last reserve of surprise. 30 men, best remaining marksmen, moving on foot under cover of darkness through a gap in the encirclement that German reconnaissance has identified on the perimeter's southern edge. The one stretch of ground Macedonian patrols cover less frequently, screened by a dry riverbed that muffles sound and breaks sight lines. The raid moves out 2 hours after midnight on day 9. For the first 90 minutes, it works exactly as Weber predicted. The German soldiers cross open ground undetected, moving in the disciplined silence that Wehrmacht infantry training has drilled into them since basic instruction, reaching the supply route without triggering a single Macedonian patrol response. Then a dog barks. It is not a Macedonian soldier who ruins the raid. It is a single camp dog, brought along by a Persian auxiliary attached to the supply train, that catches an unfamiliar scent on the night wind and will not stop barking no matter how its handler tries to quiet it. The supply guard, 12 Macedonian soldiers who would ordinarily be dangerously outnumbered by 30 German raiders, do the one thing that changes the entire calculation. They do not investigate. They light a signal fire and fall back toward their own lines, exactly as Macedonian doctrine demands when a guard detachment suspects it faces a larger force than it can handle alone. Within minutes, the darkness that shielded the German raid becomes the enemy instead. Alexander's rapid reaction cavalry, the same companion cavalry that tested German firepower on the first day of contact, moves toward the signal fire faster than Hoffmann's raiding party can complete its mission and withdraw. Weber, leading the raid himself, realizes with growing horror that they have perhaps 4 minutes before mounted Macedonian soldiers arrive. In numbers, his 30 men cannot survive in open ground at night without a single vehicle to fall back to. What happens in the next 4 minutes will decide whether the German division has any future at all. Drop your prediction below. Part 3 is coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it.